fears that people have related to cloud security. When I talk to a lot of business people, IT professionals, the immediate response is, we can't use cloud. You know, it's very insecure. And then when I start asking the question, well, why is that? The response is, well, we no longer have control of it. You know, we don't have the ability to protect it. And my response is that, well, look at it from the point of view of the vendor. The vendor's whole focus is ensuring that the service is not just available, that the data is also intact, but it's also protected. If that company ever goes down, if that company were ever attacked, their business is shot. So what they try to do is they implement some security controls to be able to protect against that. So that's kind of what I want to share today. I want to talk a little bit about that. The other thing that I want to talk about before we go forward is the safe harbor requirements. A lot of the information I shared here is a lot of the future implementation of security. If you want specifics and details on how we're going to implement that, feel free to come and talk to me. Or we can talk to other folks that can give you some better idea of what we're implementing and when we're going to be implementing that. So a few things that we talked about earlier is my background. I left it on this slide if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me. I'm also on LinkedIn. And the reason why I put that in there is because my background, dating back to 2000, has always been in cloud security. I participated in a lot of organizations that help drive the controls on cloud security. One of the areas that I still focus on is I sit on the board for the CCSK at the Cloud Security Alliance. And that's a certification for cloud security professionals. So if you're interested in looking for a certification or just gaining some knowledge about that, feel free to go on that site. There's actually a link towards the end of this slide deck that gives you more information about that. On the agenda today, I want to talk about threat horizon and landscape. The reason why I want to talk about that is that I think it's important for everybody to understand what are attackers doing today. What did they do several years ago? And what should we expect over the next couple of years? I also want to talk about what to look for. When I say what to look for, I'm not gearing it towards IT professionals or just security professionals. They already know what they're looking for. I think a lot of business people are not sure what to look for, and I want to be able to provide tools that allow you to have that conversation with the IT and security people. Another one is balanced security and operability. We don't want to implement everything that security control recommendations that are out there. If we do, we're going to introduce something where the service is no longer available. We can't do that. I want to talk about cybersecurity approach, and finally, what does it mean for you? So if we look back 3 years ago, this is the attack distribution. On the very far right, it tells you the type of attacks that were performed. Cyber espionage, warfare, hacktivism, and cybercrime. I'm going to focus on the last two, hacktivism and cybercrime. And the reason for that is that there's so much more of those. Now, this is dated back, 2012. A website called Hackmageddon tracks all of this stuff. And the way they track is they open it up for people to submit if their site's been attacked. Not every company does that. A lot of companies protect that information. They don't want to share that information. Hacktivism is growing considerably. This is where people go onto a website and they don't believe the ideas and the values that certain organizations have. And they go in there and just modify that website to share what their thoughts are. Cybercrime, on the other hand, is individuals going in and stealing stuff so that they can make some money. And there's a lot of stuff happening that are out there. You know, what's interesting about this chart is that I was talking to a number of security professionals, and this is based on US data. We looked at the data and we said, okay, what's interesting about some of this? You know, if we look at June was pretty high, so was May. And then we also looked at November. And we said, why are the other ones not consistent? Why is it, you know, up and down? And some of the other things that we came up with was, well, May is right before June, right when summer starts for us. You know, kids are going out of school, they get a little bored, they try to figure out what they're going to do. And sometimes that's the best place to do it, the best time to do it. They have a lot more free time. November, same thing. That's around the holidays for us. So it's interesting to see all that and see what it is that we can do to help protect against stuff like that. This is the time when we start looking at how to protect our environment. Here, all the online stores are prepared for any type of attacks. They start preparing in September, October timeframe. Now, when we look at the motivations of hackers, if we look at many, many years ago, I would say early 2000, maybe even before that, hackers back then just wanted to prove that they're smarter than the other person. They want to break into a network. They want to be able to modify something and then call the president and say, hey, I'm a lot smarter than any of your engineers. They just want to pat him back. They just want to brag to their other friends. They go into and try to steal government secrets. And some other stuff is emailing information or actually calling in the front desk of a building and requiring somebody to actually pull data. I actually worked at a company many, many years ago, and it was actually at WebEx. And when we had a receptionist person that was working at the front, I walked up just because I wanted to see if my guests were there. And I saw this stack of paper that's in the fax machine, one going after the other. I looked at the stack, and it was a list of all the employees, their titles, their telephone numbers, their fax numbers, their locations. And so I went up to her, I said, why are you faxing this out? She said, I'm faxing it to the CFO. And so I said, why in the world does the CFO need this fax? He has his laptop, he has his BlackBerry. He can call his receptionist to pull that information. She said that he called, said his name was Mike. Mike said he lost his BlackBerry, he didn't have his laptop, and he's at a conference and needs information for all his employees and needs it right away. So I said, okay, why don't you stop this right now, let me call Mike. I called Mike. He picked up his BlackBerry, he had his BlackBerry. I said, Mike, why do you need this list? So then we started going back and forth. He started getting really annoyed at me, and he didn't understand what was going on. Fact of the matter, he didn't know. It wasn't him. It was somebody else that was trying to take advantage of the receptionist person because the receptionist person was too scared to challenge the person that they thought was the CFO of the company. Apparently somebody was trying to get that information to be able to do spam against the company, or a recruiter trying to get us enough information to figure out who they can recruit against. So there's different ways that attacks can happen. Today, it's much more interesting. Hackers are getting a little bored. Hackers know that if they pursue just credit card information, they're not going to get not a lot of money off of it. But creating tools for other hackers, they'll make a lot more money. So there's this whole underground that's going on today where people are creating tools, actually offering their own services to other groups to be able to attack another company. And all it is for is just to be able to create new revenue for them. And we're starting to see a lot more of that. Going back to that slide where I showed you June and March, or May and June and November, a lot of those attackers were using scripts that were purchased in the black market. A lot of these hackers are new to hacking. They just want to see if it works. These are new hackers going out there. And so now they're specializing in certain skills so that they can go after a certain area, but if they don't have that skill set, they'll either hire the service or purchase a script to be able to complete their work. So if we look at that, you'll see that everybody's working together. Everybody in the hacking community working together. And this is the one thing that I try to bring over to Saba or anywhere else I've worked, is I want to be able to work together with other security professionals. Not just security professionals, business people, IT people, because security requires everybody to work together. And one of the reasons why I was able to be nominated for that exec rank is because one of the things that I put in there is that I need to be a lot more transparent about our security program so that I can work together in building a strong one with other like-minded individuals. So keep that in mind. Attackers are opportunistic. Just because we say that we're we're better than the other person doesn't mean they're not going to go after us. Our job at Saba is to make it better and harder for them to look at us and say, those guys are a little stronger, we're going to waste our time, let's go look at this other network that has a more open hole. That's our goal. Our goal is to make it very hard for attackers to get into our environment. So when they're opportunistic, there are certain areas that they look for. Recently, music, Sony, telecom retail stores are attacked. Individual attacks from Sony, meaning individual users from inside as well as outside attacks were happening at Sony. Law enforcement, because of certain cases in the US, law enforcement websites were being attacked, and I'll show you something that we do. And then government agencies, that's very common day to day. There are different types of attacks. There's account hijacking, where somebody takes over somebody's account. Denial of service attack, very common, where they just send a lot of information over to your network so that nobody else can use it. And then the last one, a lot of unknown attacks. And then a lot of unknown attacks are the ones that nobody knows about. Nobody reports on it. But when we did a research, we came across 33 different attacks. And that's just for the first 15 days of March. 33 attacks. This is when I was doing the research. Let me share some of that with you. An organization called Dump Phenom, which all they do is they go on the website and just dump usernames and passwords. They did that. They dumped over 3,765 usernames and clear text passwords. Who uses clear text passwords these days? We certainly don't. A lot of cloud providers don't. But if there's companies out there that need to put up a website very, very quickly, putting up clear text passwords is very easy to do and something that can be overlooked very fast. A hotel chain confirms that credit card data has been stolen in a hack attack on the company's network. The company's network is vulnerable. Probably a very easy way to check on that is they ran a network scan using a tool that you can get from anywhere over the internet, and some of those are free. Once you find an open port, then you can start doing your research to see if there's scripts that you can purchase to attack that port. Once you're in, then the other skill set is required to be able to take ownership of some of the systems and servers, and then you can work from there. Another one, unknown cyber criminals exploited vulnerability in a website and managed to access a database containing e-check payment information. Another company who didn't look at their vulnerabilities on the website. As we all know, vulnerabilities come up every week, every month. So Microsoft has what we call Patch Tuesdays to be able to patch for a lot of that security vulnerabilities. Popular self-made millionaire site made his millions sharing his videos. Someone attacked his website, deleted all the videos. Sure, it took a little time before he put the video back on, but he lost some money off that. Another one, anonymous claim to have taken down the network of a police department over a Tony Robinson Jr. shooting, so something that happened in the U.S. Very easy to do. Computer systems and servers at a healthcare are infected with malware designed to capture login data entered on certain websites, mostly providing financial services. So this is stuff that some of the companies didn't even realize they had. They didn't know that a vulnerability exists or a malware exists on the website. A lab medical analysis was hacked which contained hundreds of blood tests and it was held for ransom. In order for them to give it back, somebody had to pay 20,000 US euros. Another ransom, a city website was hacked and a demand for ransom was made for 100 bitcoins. All these attacks are happening. That just happened last March. I didn't follow up with the rest of the month of March, but I'm sure it doubled. Right? I'm sure it went over 60. And every month there's something new that's coming on. That's a really good website to know. If you want to know what's going on out there, if you know what the type of attacks are going on, that's the place to go to. I go there because I want to see if there's a pattern. If there's a pattern, I need to figure out if that pattern applies to Saba. And if it does, I need to put controls in place before it gets to us. Knowing your environment, knowing your hackers, knowing the types of attacks is very important. Not just getting a book, not getting an individual who has their certification. Those individuals are great, but you need to be able to look at what's going on out there. Otherwise, you're fooling yourself to think that you're not going to get attacked. The other thing that we look for is what is happening this year? What's going to happen next year? So I look at an organization called the Information Security Forum. This is a huge page. I actually have this in my office on my wall. And what I want to do is focus on 2015 and 2016. This is stuff that you need to look at within your own organization. These are surveys that were performed at all security professionals around the world. They pulled all this together to say, here's the current threat and what's going on in most companies, cloud, internal, private cloud, and all that. So if we look at the left-hand side, red increasing, that's a bad thing. But yellow means that there's still some issues that still exist. Green going down means it's improving. An example of that, I'll just focus on 2015. The CEO doesn't get it. It's going down in 2015, meaning the CEO are starting to get it. We look at Sony, we look at Target, we look at all these other companies where CEOs were actually fired. CEOs that are coming into those positions are now a lot more worried about security than they ever have been before. Board of directors, even more so. They're changing, they're shifting the responsibilities of security professionals to no longer report way down into the IT environment, but start reporting into the CEO or into the board of directors. They're taking it very, very seriously. Organizations can't get the right people. This is actually very true because there's very limited security professionals out there. A lot more jobs opened up over the past couple of years that we can't find enough people to bring in. In the US, what they're doing is they're recruiting people out of the government sector into into the commercial side. The only concern with that is that those individuals are so focused on government regulations and government focus that they end up closing or creating a denial of service against their own environment, because the controls that's applicable to the government is not applicable to the day-to-day operations of any commercial solutions out there. So they have to be trained into those roles. We're hiring people right out of school. I hired two security analysts who had a master's degree in security, but I still had to train them, I still had to coach them, I still had to mentor them on what the day-to-day life is like in security. Everything that they learned in school was great, the fundamentals were awesome, but a lot of the day-to-day activities that actually occurred, they had to learn more on the job than they did at school. So we're still looking for a lot more security professionals. Outsourcing security backfires. This is very true. A lot of companies say we don't have a big security team. There's a huge security firm out there, let's use them. The problem with outsourcing security is similar to the problem with all outsourcing. You have to have a good relationship with them. You have to know the vendor. You have to work closely with them. You need to have the right milestones together. But if you have a company that thinks that they can just outsource all of security without understanding the business and the security aspect of it, it's doomed to fail. Activists create fear, uncertainty, doubt. It says it's going down, but that's actually going down. Crime as a service upgrades to version 2.0. This is what I was talking about earlier, where the black market, the underground hackers are starting to create these services as a means to generate more revenue for themselves. This is actually what we're going to see a lot more of this. Information leaks all the time. It's very true. If you don't have the right implementation in place, excuse me, if you don't have the right engineering team evaluating the code before it goes to the production environment, you're going to see a lot of this information leakage. It's one of the reasons why security at Saba, we look at all the code before we actually take it to QA. We retest it even after QA, and then we continue to monitor it while it's in production every quarter. Bring your own cloud as a managed risk. That's actually going down. And the reason why I think this is going down is that a lot of companies are now going to the cloud. Saba, we had Exchange in-house, we had our ERP in-house, we had CRM in-house, we had coding in-house. We've moved the majority of that out. We've actually moved away from PBX systems built in-house to using VoIP systems like RingCentral. We evaluated 8x8. The reason why we did that is we started to see an increase of users bringing in their own cloud services that they can pay for $9.99. Dropbox, Google Docs, OneDrive, all of that. And the reason why they keep doing that is because it makes it easier for them to do their jobs. When we found out about that, we evaluated the Enterprise Edition and all those solutions, picked the one that works best for us, introduced that over to our user population, and on top of that, monitor who else uses it outside of the Enterprise Edition. Dropbox has this interesting feature. It says if anybody uses a Saba.com account, they'll send me an email saying, hey, you have a user that's not using your Enterprise account, that has his own personal Dropbox account. I said, perfect, I'm going to go after that person, make sure they use the corporate one. Bringing your own device further increases information risk exposure. It does, very much so. And it's going to happen more and more as a lot more individuals can access the data using their own personal device without having to get approval. So in this case, this is where we implement mobile device management. And we implement proxy environments that require users to go through one area in our network before they can gain access to those cloud services. We use Okta as a single sign-on solution, and we heavily audit all of these sites to make sure that they're not doing what they're not supposed to be doing. Finally, government and regulators won't do it for you. They can come up with recommendations, they can come up with guidance, but it's up to us to be able to determine what the right approach is for us. And that's why it's important for us to work together and figure out what the interpretation of that is, and I think we're going to talk about that today with the POPI Act. There's many different interpretations of any regulations that come out there, but the right one is what we agree together, not based on just one person's recommendation. So 2016 is in there, or you can visit the website. There's a lot of information out there that can help you think about how it applies to your organization. So what is it that you should look for? The areas that I always look at, especially in our own company, are these areas. Human resources. How do we onboard an individual? Do we do background checks? What areas do we have access to? And I'll give you an example. If an individual gets on board and they have access to the production environment, they have to have a background check completed. They have to have a security awareness completed. They have to sign off on all of our policies. They have to sign a confidentiality agreement. And they have to let us know which positions that they're in. So if they're in the system administrator role, they only get system administrator access. If they're in the database administrator role, only database administrator. Network administration only. And then we take that information and we audit it every quarter internally. We do that internally because we want to make sure that what we say or what we wrote on our policies, what we actually do. The reason why that's important to us is because we go through an annual audit by SSA 16 of our own policies. We also get audited by a lot of customers, a lot. And I think this year, let's see here, it's April, we've already went through 8 audits of a team of 5. We got really good at it too, by the way. We schedule the meeting, we schedule the conference room, we make sure the bagels are there, the donuts. We bring 2 big binders. Binders of the policies, binders of the evidence. We leave it with them for the day. We come back at the end of the day, and they say, here are the people who want to interview. We schedule it the next day. They meet with them, and then that ends it. So it doesn't take up a lot of our time. But we do have customers that require us to visit the data center itself. And that's where data governance and compliance comes in. There's a lot more strict requirements for them to review. They can receive all the SSA 16, the ISO 2700 certification of the data center. They can receive our SSA report. But they have their own governance requirements that require them to actually visit the site. That's their own policy. And we want to be able to support them. So actually, when I leave tonight and go back home, I have a week at home before I have to go fly out to Amsterdam to meet up with another audit team that's going to be auditing our data center. So this happens a lot. Sometimes when they audit our data center, they also require to have a pen test performed. Pen test is acting like a hacker, try to break the network, or try to break the web application to see if they can get in. Then they're going to identify what the gaps are. If they can get in, present it to us and say, are you going to be able to fix it? And some of our customers have an agreement, an SLA agreement that states, you have to close this out within 20 days, within 30 days, or within a week, depending on what the vulnerability is. And so we have weekly meetings just to make sure we close that out. And that goes with the data governance and compliance. We also revisit this every quarter within SADA. We have a Security Council meeting. And in the Security Council meeting, we review all of the policies, all of the audits, all of the gaps. And in the Security Council, I'm the one that manages it. But I'm not the only one that can say yes or no to anything that goes on in there. It's a collective decision. The people that are in there are the General Counsel, the Vice President of Human Resources, the Chief Technology Officer, the Chief Cloud Officer, and Product Management, sorry. Product Management has to be in there because there's certain changes that need to be made, requires them to agree to. At any point, if nobody agrees to any of that, then it escalates up to the Compliance Committee. The Compliance Committee are the ones that report to the Board of Directors. Now, the last thing we want to do is present something to the Board of Directors that we cannot agree to closing something out that's beneficial for the company and also our customers. So we make it really, really clear to everybody in that room that we need to make a decision before it gets up to that level. Information security. You need to have the right people in that group. It could be a small team, it could be a big team, but you need to have the right people. And these people need to have cloud background. If they don't have cloud background, mentor and coach them so that they do. I'm lucky enough that a lot of people that I've worked with over the years follow me from one company to the other. And so I have a good backing of security professionals that report to me. Operations and release management. This is a good business partner to have for me. And this is part of the discussion I want to talk about, security versus operability and the balance of that. So let me save that for other discussions. Architecture. The architecture, I need to be able to provide options for our customers. Because every customer has different requirements. And even though my interpretation of the legislation or my interpretation of law or my interpretation of controls is one way, it may be different towards another. So let me share a little bit more about that later. So earlier I said that when we pull people out from the government looking for those security professionals to hire, they bring in controls that could potentially shut a system down. Because 100% security on a server is actually pulling the plug and turning it off. That's considered 100% security. Right? We don't want to do that, otherwise our users won't be able to use it. So this is what we have to work with. Security versus cloud operability. And I was lucky enough to work with the Vice President of Global Operations at Saba, who understood that. I've worked with her for many years. And she's not afraid to come back at me and say, Randy, you said you want to implement this. I'm going to do what you've been telling me and not saying no. I like to say no a lot when it comes to security. She came to me and said no many times. But there's always someone that followed it. She said no, but I want to look at other options. That's the part that I just love. We always look for options that allow for us to get close to where we need to be at. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck here. Security is more important than usability, is what one security person would say. In a perfect world, no one would be able to use anything. So here's someone trying to log in. To complete the login procedure, stare directly at this cell. See this happen all the time. So here on the security side, we discover threats. We put things in place so we can detect any potential issues that come in. And then we want to be able to put something that will prevent that from happening again. Well, the balance of that is the operation says, well, let's plan it. Let's design it. Let's work together on that. Let's not just implement some of the things that you say is out there. What's a good one? The recent Poodle vulnerability was a big one. And that required us to shut SSL 3. What was SSL 3? Yeah. And we started implementing that across the board. We sent an email communication out to all of our customers. We had several customers coming back and say, we just lost this. We can no longer use this service. So that doesn't make sense. Nobody's supposed to be using SSL 3. Well, we came across a couple of companies that are really, really large, that had older versions of Internet Explorer. They couldn't support TLS, which was the only one available after SSL v3 was shut down. So we essentially closed down their ability to access us. So what ended up happening is that we had to reopen it just for that customer, but that customer wasn't vulnerable to this. So we had to figure out how to carve them away from everybody else in our network, just so that they can catch up and make sure that we can turn this off for them. There's a lot more information about that. I can share that more later. Build and deploy. They said, Randy, we don't want to keep fixing everything once it's in production. How about we take all of that information and try to put it at the very beginning once we start building that system and deploying that system. So we had to revisit our hardening standards. Remediation. So they said, well, Randy, prevention is great, but if we start preventing everything, then it goes back to how it's going to impact our customers. Let's look at how quickly we can remediate as an option for us to visit. So this is all great ways to balance out security versus operability. And the other thing that we looked at together is the whole people, process, and technology. When it comes to security, we had to work together to figure out what makes sense for the company and how do we standardize across the board. So the first thing we looked at are the people. We wanted to make sure we had qualified personnel, not just on the security side, but also in the production environment. Do they have the right network people? Do they have the right system administrators? Are they qualified to do their jobs? Are there any training that we need to provide to them? We now use our own service to train these individuals for the work that they're doing. Everybody in the company, do they understand their security responsibility? So we rolled out this awareness program for all employees. Cloud security experience, as I mentioned earlier, is very important. The other one are background checks. At what level are we okay with certain alerts that come back on the background checks? And for what positions? Which positions should we look at reviewing? And what positions should we say, no, we're not going to accept any alerts at all? Alerts meaning if there's a response back to their background check, do we like, or there's something bad that occurred in their past life, and whether or not we want that person to be responsible for our production environment. So we took some really hard stance. Separation of duties and least privilege access is what I mentioned about putting people on the network team versus the database versus the system administrator roles. And then security council to make sure that we have all the right people together making the decision and not one security guy making all the decisions for the company. Process was also very important to us. And the reason why that's important to us is because we follow certain frameworks, the ISO 2700 framework. We also perform third-party penetration tests. Here's what's interesting about this pen test. We do it for all of our data centers. Each data center goes through a pen test. And every geographic location where we have our data center, we use a different pen tester. The reason why we do that is because the US side pen testers, they have one view on the type of information that US-based companies are interested in. We go to Europe, completely different view on what it is that pen testers should be looking for. That's why we use a different pen tester there. In Sydney, or in Australia, we use a completely different pen tester for that group as well. Vendor sourcing selection. Now, this topic doesn't come up often, and this is something that I talk to our legal team a lot about. And what we're seeing more and more is that vendor supply chain security is not done that well with any company. And so we came up with a standard template in our agreement that says, you will allow us to do this. We require you to have this. An example of that, they will allow for us to come in and audit. They are required to provide a SSA 16 report, perform a pen test, undergo a third-party review, and that's up to us to decide. System access management is another area that we focus on. System hardening, disaster recovery, and incident management. Disaster recovery, whenever we do a disaster recovery, some of the questions that come up is, well, if we do a disaster recovery, and you have a main data center in Europe, does that fill in the US? What we did over the years was we made sure it stays within the same geographic location. We don't want the data to leave that geographic location, we want it to remain there. So that's very important to us. We continue to revisit the RTO and RPO list. We want to improve on that, and every time we do, we're also looking at changing our production environment to be a lot better. Incident management is also another thing that we work very closely with our customers. This is something you should require of all of your vendors. What is your incident management process? How quickly will you notify us if there's an incident? And do you only do it when you find out that our data is impacted in any way? The answer is yes. I see different requirements. One is as quickly as possible. Another one is within 24 hours notice. Another one is 48 hours notice. And so you can work with your vendor on what type of information that they can share with you. Now, here's an example of some of the stuff that happened. All these announcements came out. This is pretty small, but this gives you an example of the announcement we made. Bash bug and shell shock, when we found out that there was a vulnerability and affected everybody, the question was, how do we notify our customers? This is an example of that. We did the same thing for Poodle and some of the other known vulnerabilities out there. We notified all of our customers that there's a vulnerability that came out. It does not affect us, in this case it didn't. This is the checks that we perform, and if you have any questions, please let us know. We also have behind the firewall customers, where we actually notified them that they should also check their environment to make sure that they're not vulnerable to it as well. So we try to take a very proactive approach when it comes to some of these vulnerabilities that we hear about out there. We also review what we have in our environment, then we're not going to know what we're vulnerable to. And as soon as we start sleeping behind the wheel, all it takes is just one attack for someone to come in and we didn't see that vulnerability that we should have patched. Encryption is what we offer to all of our customers if they're interested in using Solid Cloud. And what's interesting, I have these conversations with our customers all the time. Encryption in transit, meaning from the browser over to our network, that's always encrypted. The question that they ask is, well, what about encryption at rest? We offer that. But when it comes to encryption at rest, the threat that you're trying to eliminate is someone running into the data center, looking for the hard drive that they want, taking it out, walking out of the data center. That's what the encryption protects against. There's a lot of other encryption, such as in motion, that we can talk about, but that's a whole different system. When you start looking at encryption, then you have to start worrying about performance attacks as well. So those are the discussions that we would love to have with our customers, and we've had plenty of discussions around that. System admin access, we monitor this very aggressively. Every quarter, we request for all the access to our systems. Our security analyst does that. She requests from our HRS system all of the employees and their roles and responsibilities, and then matches who has access to the production environment. If they're still employed and they still have access and they're still in that position, then they're okay. The other thing that they look at is, when was the last time they did the background check? If it's more than 5 years old, then we have to redo another background check. If an employee shows terminated and there's still access out there, then we treat that as an incident. We start raising it up to the Security Council. We bring the hiring manager on board, we bring HR, and then we ask what went wrong. The process should be, as soon as we send a notification, all accounts, regardless of where it's at, should be terminated. So that's something that that we watch every quarter. We don't want more than 3 months to go by for us to find this. And the reason why we don't want to is because of the environment that we have. If we look at this data center map, we have data centers in the US, Canada, in Europe, and also in Australia. When we look to see who has access to that and where the data resides, it stays in that geographic location. Every time we look at a data center, there's a few things that we do. Operations team look at the data center to make sure that high availability is there, that it's a co-location, that they confirm that the network paths are there, that the power grid is there. They look at a number of different things when it comes to that. Before we can sign anything, security has to go out there and audit it. We check to see if they're ISO certified, they have SSA 16, that all the cameras are in the right place, that whatever they say they do, they actually do. Now, I got to share a story with you. We had a data center in Amsterdam at a previous company where I had to go in and audit it. They said, oh yeah, we're very secure. We have everything that you need. We have an SSA 16 report. We have a certification. I read the report. The report was outdated. It was no longer applicable. I looked at the ISO 27001 certification. It wasn't a certification. It was a statement saying that they will pursue it. So I guess the marketing team got around it and started putting some words in it to make it sound really good. I went over to the data center and said, okay, I need to physically audit it. Show me your 24/7 security guard. I said, okay, wait right here. That's the front gate. The security guard was driving around outside. He said, there he is. I go, where's he going? He goes, he comes around every 2 hours. I go, I thought you had a security guard inside the data center. He goes, no, we don't need that. Walked into the data center. And I said, show me all your CCTVs. And they said, let me show you a map first. If you look at the map, here are all the CCTVs. And he thought that that was it. And I said, no, I need to physically see them. So I went from one hallway to the other, went inside the data center, and I looked across the hall and I said, I think there's supposed to be a CCTV there. He says, no. And I go, look on the map. He goes, yeah. So we walked over there and we moved the boxes around, and sure enough, the CCTV was at the top, but it's being blocked by boxes. How effective is that? CCTV being blocked by boxes. So that's why we do these physical audits ourselves. What was said on paper doesn't necessarily mean that it's out there. So that's why we do it. We look for high availability. We need the Tier 1 redundant network, 24/7 service reliability engineering, meaning we can call someone and say, hey, there's something wrong with the network, something wrong with the power, what's going on, please be available. Maximum performance is what we're looking for, operational efficiency, resilience, and multi-layer security and experienced personnel. Again, whatever applies to us, we apply to our data centers, our own vendors. Now, monitoring and alert management. From an operations side, we work very closely with them because there's a lot of stuff that they can get for us that we can dive a little bit deeper into security. End-to-end monitoring, guaranteed uptime stability, and we leverage tools such as Nagios for infrastructure monitoring, New Relic for application monitoring, Splunk for log aggregation, Web Robot, response time monitoring, customer health dashboard is what we offer as well. And then some of the security tools, Sumo Logic, Caspida, and Qualys. These two solutions, Sumo Logic and Caspida, are very, very new tools. And the reason why I want to mention that is that when we look at security tools, just because there are security tools out there and implemented doesn't mean it's the right one. If we look at the latest threat that's happening out there, if we know the vulnerabilities that exist, if we know the type of hackers and how they get in, you need to revisit your tools. You can't just have an IDS and IPS and expect that to work. If we look at antivirus today, it's not effective. We need to revisit every single one of these tools. We had a log solution that was in place, and then we replaced it with Sumo Logic. Caspida is a solution that allows for us to go in and say, hey Randy, we saw something come in through the IDS, didn't trigger alert. We pulled a log from the server that shows that a administrative level was accessed. We didn't alert on it, but we started paying attention to it. We started alerting when a call was made to a server outside, which is not the right, that's not the right thing for that server to do. That's when it started alerting us. So every year we revisit all of our tools. We don't just renew it, we make sure we find the right tool that's innovative, that has the latest solution that allows for us to attack or identify some unique attacks in our environment. And then of course logging at multiple levels from the application, server, network, we correlate all that data so that we can see if there's anything going on that may stand out. Now, customer requirements, this is the fun part. Every customer has their own unique requirements. And it could be because of just their own security practice. We have our policy, we develop this way, we don't necessarily follow your standards, but we want you to follow ours. We can't do that for every customer. But what we do is we look at all the requirements and we try to pick the most strict policy requirements and we follow that. We share that with our customers. Follow company policies and protection based on classification of data. Every company has their own way of classifying data. Saba, we took one stance. Any customer data is company confidential, and we protect it as such. A lot of our customers are okay with that. Companies have varied security requirements. They want us to give our logs over to our customers so that they can review and monitor. The concern is, though, is that logs may have other customer information in there that we can't provide. So instead of having to do that, I like to look at options, and those options are, what is it that you want to monitor for? Maybe we can work together on that. Compliance requirements, such as POPI. Everybody has different compliance requirements. And some requirements are based on interpretation of compliance requirements, as I was saying earlier. So that's me a couple of times. I actually have a QWERTY tattoo on the forehead every time I have conversations like this with many customers, because I'm trying to figure out what's the right approach. And so what we decided to do is just look at our deployment choices and standardize on that. And hopefully that'll provide that'll meet the broad requirements of all of our customers. So when we look at Saba Cloud, this is how our environment looks like. We have our standard firewall or load balancers. We have our application stack, and then we have our data stack. As I mentioned earlier, network team only has access to the network. System administrator only has access to the system side. Database only has access to the database. This is in our production environment and our data centers. So we standardize across that throughout all of our data centers. Now, the question becomes, well, what about countries where you don't have a data center? What can you do there? We have all these discussions all the time with our customers. And so what we introduced was a private cloud option, where we can give it to our partners, and in some cases our customers. The prices are different between the two. And so you need to have that conversation with us to understand if it's the right time for you. So if we look at the different functionality capabilities, they're both the same. Shared cloud services, well, yes in the public cloud, but no, meaning it's only shared with you. Shared schema, no in both cases. Data resides in the Saba data center for the public cloud. On the private cloud, customer designated data center. The SLA ownership, this is interesting. 98% is Saba, or 99.9% is Saba. There's still some responsibility on the customer side. However, the SLA ownership has to go to the customer on the private cloud. You own the infrastructure, we own the software, we'll be able to ensure that the software is up to date. Hardware, there is a difference there along with the network infrastructure. On the private cloud, the customer owns the network. Upgrades, we will maintain the upgrades for both. And that's an interesting approach that we took. When it comes to the private network, we still have a connection to it, but only a connection that allows for us to push patches out to. That way you can stay consistent with all the other public clouds. You get all the features and functionality, but we do not have user accounts or user access on any of the systems. And that's a unique approach that we took, which is really good. I'm really happy about that approach that we took. Remote monitoring. We can also still monitor just by logs being pulled into a central repository so that we can tell you if there's an issue coming up. And if we can fix it, we can fix it before you're even notified and push it out. And then, of course, level 1 and level 2 support, level 3 and level 4 support, the difference between the two. So, what does this mean to you as leaders within your own organization? There's a lot of offerings out there. I talked about the motivation of hackers. I talked about the past threats, future threats, current threats. I mean, all this is data that you're responsible for. But we would like to share with you that it's also our responsibility. We want us to be viewed as the extension of your security team. It's our responsibility to make sure that you're secure as well. And that's why it's important to solve out. So we shared with you how we can meet some of the varying customer requirements. And the biggest thing that you should look for is the type of transparency any cloud provider provides. If you say we want to see your penetration test report, I was having this conversation earlier, I said yes, absolutely. We're going to initially share the executive report that doesn't cover the details. But if there's a request to see the detailed penetration test report, the reason why we're scared of the details of the penetration test report is because line by line, it tells you exactly how to penetrate the network and get in and compromise the network. We don't share that with the business side. We share that with other security professionals because we like to believe that there's this code that we share that says, look, we're here to make things better, and we will protect that information together. We just need to know how it goes in there so we can come up with some options, either to protect their side or make recommendations to solve how we can protect it if we can't fix it right away or in the time frame that they require. So there's a certain level of transparency you should expect, and I'll share a little bit more about that. The other one is how cloud providers can enable your compliance requirements. What is it that they do that allow for you to do that? If you listen or talk to some of the other cloud providers, they'll tell you, oh yeah, do you have credit cards that you use? We have a PCI compliant environment. It's the first thing you say. If you dive deeper and say, well, what does that cover? You'll start to learn that it only covers one area of their network. It doesn't cover the entire network, it just covers one certain area. And the reason why they do that is to maintain cost. They'll come out and say, oh yeah, we have SSA 16. Show me the SSA 16. When you look at the SSA 16, it's only for their data center. The difference between that is if it's their data center's policy applies, not your vendor, not the cloud provider's policies, which is more important. So look for the information, understand the compliance requirements, and see what it is that they're looking for. So when you ask them, what is your security posture? They'll say, look at our data center audit. Here's our privacy statement. Here's some white papers on security. They'll just throw more architecture at you, and hopefully that'll just confuse you and not want to pay any more attention. And then the last thing is they're very reluctant to share details, citing protecting their existing customers. That I just don't like. Every time I hear that, especially with my own vendors, because I manage IT at Sala, I go to these vendors and these vendors says, well, I can't share that with you because we need to protect our customers. That irritates me. That's a quick elimination of that vendor from my list right away. If you keep asking the questions and know what questions to look for, you want to ask, or do you allow customers to audit your environment? Can you share with me a list of controls and responses for it? I use the cloud controls matrix and the consensus assessment initiative questionnaire. I'll share more about that in the last slide. Do you perform independent third-party reports? And we share like SOLA's policies, standards, and process. You have a SOC 2 Type 2 report, and I'll share some links to where you can get that information. Do you have disaster recovery executive summary, and when was the last time we tested that? Policies and standards, table of contents. If you can't share the policies and standards, the details of that, can you at least share the table of contents of that? What type of independent third-party penetrations have you performed? And network and application vulnerability executive report, can you provide that within 48 hours? If they say no to any one of these, then the red flags should start coming up and say, I'm not sure if I really want to go with this cloud provider. If they can share all of this with you, then your comfort should start going up. If you start reading the data though, and see if the data the data is favorable, then that's great. If it's not, see if they're open to have that conversation as to why not. Could be a good reason. Here are the different links that I recommend you looking at. These are all free. The Cloud Security Alliance, this is an organization that Sava's a part of, that I'm a part of. I've been a part of since 2010. And what we do is we develop controls so that we can better educate cloud vendors as well as cloud users on what to look for. These two, Consensus Assessment Initiative and the Cloud Controls Matrix, are listed questions you can ask your vendors. And when they respond to it, look for a section that says no. And if you see a no, then dive deep in that section. Okay? Your security people would love you if you look and participate and actually do a lot of this work. We encourage our team, we're at Sava, to do it as much as often. We use this all the time. And our salespeople will tell you that every time our customer comes in and says, hey, do you have some time to answer our security questionnaires? We turn this around and provide this because it's a lot more details in here than some of the questions that our customers are asking for. We want to provide as much as we can to help them understand our security posture. Statements on standards of attestation engagement, that's the SSA 16. This link will give you some ideas of what it is you should look for. What does the audit perform? And that way it'll give you a better idea of whether or not you want to review that or accept that. Another one, European Union Agency Act of Network and Information Security, otherwise known as ENISA. It's another organization that helped participate in 2010. Really good organization. And then, of course, what we're going to talk about in a little bit is the very last one, Poppy Act. Slides are available too, so feel free to pull from that. And at this point, I'd like to open up to any questions that anybody has.
Is there any specific region that you found the hacking community more or less comes from, or is it something outside of
I've heard so many different responses on this. A lot of the attacks were coming from China. And then when I talk to some folks in China, China says, no, there's people from Russia attacking our server, and then from our server they'll attack the US. So it's really hard to say where these attacks are coming from. Some of the Korean. It's hard to say.
Is the motivation just profit or belief system clashes, or is it recreational sometimes?
Well, right now it's less recreational and it's more hacktivism and more cybercrime. So yes, any monetary value that can be assigned to an attack, that's usually the more common attacks.
What is your incident report look like at the moment? If we're saying in the last 6 months, what the SARS incident report look like?
So I think there's a few questions in there. One is, how many times have you been attacked? Another one is, what type of data do you have in your incident report? So luckily, we have not been attacked. Incident varies all across, and we do have a lot of incident reports. The incident reports include the one where we had the implementation of Poodle, but then we brought down the service of one of our customers. That is considered an incident. So when we dive down into it, we have details in there that says, when did this start? It started when we started implementing the F5 implementation to block SSL version 3. It also has the date and time of when it brought down the service for that customer. Then it also includes when that customer notified us. Then it includes when do we notify the customer ourselves, and who do we notify. It also included the language in the customer agreement that states, if any incident, here's what you're supposed to do. And then it also has a what can we do, or what did we do to bring back the service, and roll it back. Then the last one is what can we do to improve improve from this happening again, and that is understanding our customer environment and their use so that we don't bring it down. We sent this over to our customer. We had a pretty lengthy discussion, and it was an interesting discussion because the security folks were complaining about this, and then the business side said, wait a second, does this mean that we're vulnerable? And my response is, yes, you're vulnerable. We're trying to protect you. And that led to a whole different discussions that we were taken offline from at that point on. And they said, thank you, you can close out that incident. That's an example of an incident. Another example of an incident is a user lost his laptop. And the way we have our laptops created at Summit is we have hard disk encryption for all of our laptops. When this individual lost his laptop, he left it in the airplane. We asked, what did you do? What type of steps you've taken? So we listed all that. We also listed what customer potential data are on there, even if it's just emails. And so we had to list all that. We're lucky enough, we got the laptop back and we validated that everything was intact. But it was still an incident. And so we kept that. So small things like that. Someone had a malware on their laptop. That's considered an incident. It may not take as long to put together, but it's still something that we identify as an incident.
What's the percentage of hacking from internal within employees in the business to external? Is there a
Yeah, there's this study that's been going on between the FBI and another company, I want to say it's RCA and FBI does a study every year. They've been doing that since 2006. And every report every year, the average is 70 to 80% insider threat is more obvious. So you do have internal users that have more access to the environment and will end up gaining access to areas that they're not supposed to have. So the approach that we take is we segregate everybody, make sure that they don't have access to everything. But there are still employees that have access to information. And that's when we also deploy data loss protection implementation. The data loss protection would look for keywords, confidential, social security number, credit card, and it would alert us if we see any of that being emailed out or transferred out of our network. It gets more difficult as employees start to work from home. There's not a lot of technology available today that allows for us to monitor the devices directly. But in that case, we start looking at awareness training to help reduce the likelihood of those individuals doing anything worse. And in there, it says we will pursue you through termination up to legal action, whichever is necessary. So we try to discourage that as much as possible. And we are looking, as I mentioned, at tools to be able to implement at the endpoint. Because if we look at where security was before, you used to be able to protect your environment on the network, what we call the perimeter. Well, the perimeter got extended out as soon as cloud started getting introduced. People work at a Starbucks or at home, and they're outside of that perimeter, so we can't monitor them. Now, all the security professionals are now looking at the individuals as the perimeter. We need to identify what we can put on the laptops and the desktops to be able to monitor the activity and let the individual know we're monitoring. The concern that we have is how will we be able to do that on a global scale? Because certain geographic locations have laws and regulations that we have to follow and make sure we understand before we can implement something like that.
Is there an average age of that?
I think the average age is actually pretty young. I don't know off the top of my head, but for 50% of the 33 that I shared, they were under 20. They have a lot of time on their hands.
Sorry, so you did this question for Craig.
Does your risk increase if you try solution integration with other applications?
Yeah, so the question is, does our risk assessment increase or risk concerns increase as we integrate with other applications? The answer is yes. And if they are vendors, then that would be the supply chain concern that I would have. So we do add in the language that we have to evaluate them, we have to audit them. A good example of this is an organization called HireRight. Is anybody familiar with HireRight? They're a global background check firm. And I went through this exercise. We were hiring them as a vendor. But they said that as part of their process, they have to accept us. In order for them to accept us, they have to audit us. And I was like, isn't that a little backwards? And they said that the background check is used for a lot of companies. And what they don't want is to have fictitious companies using their service from other individuals that never signed off saying they're going to get a background check. And I thought that made a lot of sense. So I also turned around and said, I hope you know that we have to audit you too. And so that's what we have to do. We're integrating HireRight into our solid cloud solution so that we can do a background check. And that's actually a release that we're going to be introducing.
This might be a question also for Simone later, but is there any research that guides you on evaluating the monetary value of data? Is that you are able to evaluate the value of your data? Because if I think about a learning management system, it's not a commercial system. It's primarily personal data. And as a layman, you think, why am I interested in your surname and your name? Yes, your ID number for identity theft and that kind of thing, but is there research and guidance for evaluating the value of your data for an hacker?
I was thinking the same, actually. I was going to be a little bit frivolous, with no disrespect. I think in South Africa there wasn't an AGI
salvo and those South African breweries, man, you'd have a hack attack. They're just a lot of brewers. But I mean, taking your point, I mean, there's not, you don't have financial information there, it's really just personal information. But I suppose if the guys try and hack backwards and get into payroll and all of that stuff, which is on another system, being one way that, I suppose that's where it comes in, but a very good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. There are tools and templates available out there. For example, if you're going to pursue ISO 27001, one of the requirements is you implement an information system management solution. And it's a pretty long, detailed process, but the shorter version of that is you need to implement a business impact analysis. And the business impact analysis states what is your critical assets. If you were to lose that asset were stolen, if the asset were taken out, how big of a cost is it to your company? And the cost would be many different things. Cost to replace, cost of your insurance, cost to come up with solutions to protect your customers. All of those get put together into that model, and it really depends on each organization. And so some of these already have the templates in place and all the formulas in place, and you just need to plug in the numbers that you believe is the right value, and then that'll come up with the value that you might be looking for. And some of these values are really not necessarily monetary values, they're more risk values, 1 through 5. And then I'll tell you, this is the most at risk, and you have compensating controls to reduce that. So those are templates out there. They're actually free if you do a search online for BIA, and that'll help you see what assets you need to focus more of your time on.
Perhaps if I can also respond in that, it would depend, in my opinion, on the type of learning data that may be stored. So if it's compliance, for example, if you think of the financial services industry in South Africa, where compliance with phase and FICA is an absolute. It's the risk of information getting out that your financial advisors and financial people that are supporting your clients are not compliant, and the relative impact of that at the brand level. So what would it say if you are Bank X and 50% of your people are not compliant? Well, what's the reaction? Now, is that a monetary value? Could you put it? It's a reputational risk. And there have been instances where people's learning management data has been hacked, and it's been nondescript data that has been shared, around what people are learning, but the reputational risk associated with it. So, the fact that you might not be able to get to a monetary value of what would it mean if that data was exposed may not necessarily be the be-all and end-all from a vulnerability perspective. We need to look at it from a reputation risk. Right?
Just to add to that, Gavin, one of our clients recently told us that even the stuff that they train sometimes is sensitive because it might be on business processes that you don't want the competition to have, or even other people to have to see, because it might have an impact on your reputation.
And in certain instances, it's less about the record even, and it could be to the content. So if I can hack into the system, can I get into the content? Think of a business who's launching a new product, and they're running all the training through a secure environment, and all the product training, the latest launches of product X, are all sitting on the data center. Imagine if the opposition gets line of sight of that, and suddenly there's video content of all the new releases of iOS, or the version of the content gets thrown out there. It will be embarrassing and emotionally damaging. Any other questions? Yes, please.
What's your opinion about the possibility of it becoming a reality? Brazil mentioned late last year that they want to implement legislation that any cloud-based platform that has information about any Brazilian citizen or organization can't leave the sovereign borders of Brazil. Has that been a concern for South Africa, or do you think it won't become reality?
So we'll probably learn more about that as far as how it applies to South Africa, but I could share some of my experience with other customers that interpret that in other countries. So we've had hundreds of customers in Europe, as an example. And there's a mix and match between those that believe that the data has to reside within that geographic location, and they cannot use us. And then there are other customers that says, no, that's not the right interpretation of the law. We can have it in your country. We just need to know who has access to it and make sure that it's not outside of the EEA. So any organization that does not belong to EEA, they have to know about it. So it goes back again to the interpretation of that. But we do have a mix between customers that prefer it and other customers that are okay with it. And that's why the architecture that we set up, we set it up in a way that allows our customers to feel comfortable by keeping the data and residing in that specific location.
Okay, are there any other questions from the floor? No? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
That was awesome. Thanks very much for sharing that. I think lots to learn and lots to digest.